What is up, duelists, and welcome back to another Yu-Gi-Oh discussion video. And with the latest ban list update, of course, and my reaction, you guys know that there's a few things on this ban list that I was really happy with, and there's a few things missing on this ban list that I was rather unhappy with. And it's led to a lot of interesting discussions on my streams in the last couple of days, one of which I wanted to share with you guys today because I feel like it was a pretty good one. And I've been wanting to get these points out there to maybe get people to better understand why I've been on this sort of like crusade against certain non-engine cards in the game recently, and I just wanted to get your guys' opinion on it. All I'm asking for is that you listen to the points that I'm making and that you think critically about them, and if you disagree, that's completely fine. I actually want people to talk about these things and bring up counter arguments in the comments down below, or reacting to the video, or all sorts of things. It's just been a very interesting discussion to me personally, and as someone who's always, like, you know, thinking about the future of the game and how the development in the game is going at the moment, it's been something I wanted to talk about, so I hope you enjoyed today's discussion video. Without further ado, let's get started. I feel like you have to make a distinct difference. You do have to make a distinct difference between modern Yu-Gi-Oh, which is very much like a different game than retro Yu-Gi-Oh, because I think this idea only applies in the sense, like, modern Yu-Gi-Oh is very much a build a board type game, right? Like, the modern Yu-Gi-Oh is no longer a like long-winded back and forth, like turn after turn after turn, which is fine, by the way. I don't mean this in a negative way, but if you had to explain modern Yu-Gi-Oh to someone else who doesn't understand it, they're like, hey, what is this game about? You wouldn't say like, oh yeah, you play like a bunch of turns back and forth, summon monsters, attack each other. Like, that's not what modern Yu-Gi-Oh is, right? Like, modern Yu-Gi-Oh as a game is something where player one tries to make a board, and then player two tries to solve that puzzle, right? Like, player two tries to play into that board. That is, in an essence, the idea of modern Yu-Gi-Oh, right? Like, player one makes a board that presents a challenge to player two, and player two tries to solve that challenge, right? That I think, in a nutshell, is modern Yu-Gi-Oh in a lot of cases. Of course, there are decks that like don't work like this, but for the most part, I think that's a pretty accurate description. Like, if I had to summarize modern Yu-Gi-Oh in one sentence to someone, that's what I would say. And I think most of the time, the best Yu-Gi-Oh games, in my opinion, are the ones where player one is allowed to make a board. Because when player one isn't allowed to make a board, then this whole game falls apart. It's not really a game if player one doesn't have a board to present to player number two, right? So player number one needs to make a board for this concept to work. However, and here's the caveat, in order for this game to be fun for both players, player two needs to have a reasonable chance at playing into that board. That's the only way how this game works. That's the only way how this game is fun, when both players get to take part in it. And for that to work, player one needs to make a board, and player two needs to have a chance at breaking it. And so every time there's a deck, or when there's interaction that's happening that's preventing that from happening, I think that's bad. That's how I feel about modern Yu-Gi-Oh! It's like when player one, and this is also why I have such a big issue in recent years with the negation hand traps, because the negation hand traps fundamentally stop this from happening, right? Because the goal of those cards is to not let you play. And I think that's weird when the underlying idea of the game is player one makes board, player two tries to break it. Why do I have cards that like don't let that happen? Cool Tune makes player one solve the puzzle instead. That is also true. Cool Tune also falls out of the like equation here, or like it doesn't really fall into that equation super well, because it kind of like eliminates the puzzle from player two and instead puts it into the puzzle of player one's hand. Which I think also, that is probably, if I really think about it, that is probably the most accurate description of why Cool Tune is so polarizing and so hated, is because normally the dynamic is the turn one is the like player one solves the puzzle of how do I get to my board, and then player two is supposed to solve the puzzle of, hey, can I win this game, can I play into this board? With Cool Tune, player one has both puzzles. player one is like, how do I get to my board? How do I maneuver around like your stuff? Here's my end board, I present it to you. However, I also look at your hand, and now I get to kind of like dictate how this game goes, because I understand what you can do to break this board, right? And this is something, you know, right? So I think, I don't know if I was able to phrase it properly, but I think if I had to describe modern Yu-Gi-Oh to someone else, like the games that are the most fun and the goal of the game, or like how the game flows, is typically player 1 is supposed to make a board and player 2 is supposed to try and break it. And every time there's a dynamic happening that stops this flow of game, it's not good. And this is something we see with floodgates. This is something we see with unbreakable boards, because unbreakable boards, basically, once again, they only make player 1 play the game, basically, right? Because in this equation of player 1 makes board, player 2 tries to break board, if player 2 sees the board and knows they can't win no matter what they do, the game doesn't function. Like, the game has failed its purpose because, you know, yeah. So turn 0 is bad. Turn 0 plays, I think, are fine in that equation, because it's just basically player 2 getting a little bit of an early in to the game, right? Like, player 2 just starts playing a little bit earlier than usual, but at the end of the day, it's still player 1 who's trying to make a board through the turn 0 stuff, and then the turn 0 stuff gives player 2 a little bit of a head start. But I think that's not a big issue. But the thing is, like, there's always two discussions with it, but there's also, like, every time you discuss something, an exception is always when a certain card does something just way too well. Like, even if you reach the conclusion that, like, turn 0 plays in general are fine, there can still be a turn 0 play that is way too broken, and therefore still unhealthy. Like, even healthy things can be unhealthy if they're just way too powerful, or if they do way too much, right? So you need more context. You can't always generalize it like this, but in general, you can't generalize, but in general, it's a great sentence, Josh. Awesome. You know what I mean? You get what I say. Hand traps are sort of turn 0. Yes, I mean, hand traps are turn 0 plays, but, like, my argument essentially, right? And you can let me know if you agree with the fundamental or not, but, like, in the game of player 1 makes a board and player 2 tries to play into that board, I feel like there is very little room for negation. Like, I just think negation, it fundamentally goes against the idea of an interactive game when you just stop something in its tracks. And I find that it's not that all of those cards are broken. Like, I'm not here to argue that a card like Effect Veiler is broken. It's not. Effect Veiler, in terms of its power level, is a fine card. My argument is it's not fun. If the goal is, instead of playing the game with each other, which requires cards to resolve, negating cards doesn't really feel fun to me. So, in my opinion, what you need to do in order to make this game as fun as it can be is you need to make sure that player 1 is allowed to play the game. Player 1 is allowed to make a board. We shouldn't just rely on negating both two starters and hoping they pass the turn with nothing. We should want player 1 to pull off their combos to make a board, but we also need to make sure that that board is beatable with normal hands. Like, of course, you're not supposed to, like, be able to win against everything all the time when you're going second. Like, sometimes player 1 is also supposed to win a game because they play well and they play a good deck, right? But it's never supposed to be, your end board just shouldn't be so strong that you have no chance at breaking it. And I honestly would be completely fine with hand traps, or essentially, dude, I was distracted by someone in chat saying, what's the point of making a board then if it just gets broken? Yeah, dude, what's the point of playing a game when you can lose? Wouldn't you just rather play a game that you always win? I'd be fine with hand traps and non-engine if they contributed to the game in a way that, like, you don't stop your opponent from playing, but you stop, like, something specific so that the end board just gets weaker, right? Which is something that hand traps, a lot of the time in the early days of them making hand traps, they actually did this a lot of the times. Like, you would hand trap a certain thing that you knew would access a certain card, and as a result, that made the end board more breakable. I don't know, I think a good example of this is like Salamangrate in 2019, when you could just Ash the Gazelle, and then you knew that they would be missing a trap card on their end board, right? Because Gazelle, often, if they already had Engine, they would access Rage or Roar, to get it back from the graveyard, right? And then you would be like, okay, let me just Ash the Gazelle so that you don't have that trap. And as a result, the Salamangreat player was still making a board. They were still playing the game. They were not completely out of it, but the Ash always had value because you would always take away something from their end board. It was like, yeah, let me trade this Ash Blossom in my hand so I don't have to play against your Omni Negate trap. Fine, right? Same thing with Orchist, for example, right? Like Veiler, let me just Veiler your Galatea so you don't have the trap card. You still, or the field spell, one of the two, whichever one you were going to go for. Let me Veiler the Galatea. You don't get that card. You still get to make the rest of your Orchist board. You still get your follow-up. You still get your IP Masquerena. That's all fine. I'm not trying to prevent that. You can have that. But let me stop you from getting your Omni Negate trap or your field spell that makes everything a quick play on my turn, right? So this, in my opinion, is a very healthy approach to hand traps in the game. And the magic word here is choke points, right? Those are meaningful choke points in the existing meta decks, which make hand traps healthy. In modern Yu-Gi-Oh, I think a lot of the times this is not existent anymore. And you can find exceptions to this, of course, but in most cases, Yu-Gi-Oh decks are so powerful going first these days, and if you let one card resolve, they split up into so much advantage that most of the time, it is just best in terms of your raw chances of winning the game. It is just best to hit the first thing. It is just best to affect Veiler the Cool Tune Q or the whatever, right? Like the cards have just become so efficient and so good at making end boards that hand traps and like choke points for hand traps don't really exist anymore. So most of the time what ends up happening is the play style that happens from hand traps is I just try to hit your starter and I kind of just hope that you pass. And if you don't pass, then it feels like I've wasted my card a lot of the times. Not always. There are exceptions, but a lot of the times. And I think that is not what the initial like purpose of those cards was. And it's also something that is, I would not call this healthy gameplay. I don't think that is healthy gameplay. I think that's basically doing a complete 180 on what hand traps, but like hand traps went from pretty healthy gameplay to, I think, pretty unhealthy gameplay. And I wanted to make that clear that that's not always been the case. I think the examples from TOS format in Salamangreat and Orchist, I think those are actually pretty good examples why hand traps were initially good for the game. Those were meaningful interactions with hand traps. So the idea of an Effect Veiler or an Ash Blossom in those formats is like, well, I can make a meaningful decision on where to interact with my opponent, and as a result, that gives me a better chance going second because I don't have to sit there, watch them full combo, and I can't do anything about it, right? I have a meaningful way to interact, to choose what I cut off from their end board, and as a result, that's going to make my going second better, and it also introduces skill into the game because I have to make that choice where to Veiler or where to Ash, right? Like, and that's the thing, right? In Orchist format, for example, like you can make the decision to affect Veiler the Armageddon Knight, right? Like you can do that. If they normal summon Armageddon Knight, you can Veiler it and just hope they can't play. But you also can make the decision to not do that, right? You can make the decision to be like, yeah, you know what? I'll let that Armageddon Knight resolve. I know that guarantees you can play, but I know also I can cut you off of this endboard piece by Veilering the Galatea. And if I look at my hand and I think it's good enough to play the game with you, then I'll play the game with you. I'll not risk trying to Veiler your just first starter, right? This whole thought process, this whole interaction and stuff like that, it's in a lot of cases in modern Yu-Gi-Oh! Not exist anymore, right? So this is just some context that I wanted to get out there because people have been like confused why I've been hating on hand trap gameplay recently, because of course hand traps have been a thing for a long time. I do think, and this is something I've paid more attention to over the last couple of months because I've been thinking about it more and more. I think that the gameplay that stems from these cards has not aged super well. And I will agree with you. A lot of people are saying, well, we need hand traps to combat some of the combo decks in the format because, well, if I don't make my opponent pass on nothing, then they will FTK me. And that is also something I agree with. I think that is a problem that modern Yu-Gi-Oh has. I think if we didn't have hand traps immediately, it probably would be worse for the game because a lot of decks would be doing a lot of crazy shit. What my argument is, like, I don't think hand traps are an appropriate solution to this anymore because the gameplay that stems from it is not great either. So what I want is I want more solutions. I want more solutions that aren't just about like negating your opponent's plays, because I think negating plays in modern Yu-Gi-Oh is not healthy, as I've just discussed. So I think they need to make decks that are lower power leveled. And I would also really appreciate it if we get more tools for the player going second that are not just based on negating your opponent's plays, right? Like, and I think cards like this can be this can go a lot of different directions. You know, for some cases, Charmies sometimes are this, but I also don't want Charmies to be the only solution for this because for a lot of decks, Charmies do feel really bad. You know, like the thing is, like, in competitive Yu-Gi-Oh, for a lot of the good decks in the format, Charmies are a fine solution to this problem, but then they do kill a lot of like rogue decks. But also in general, a lot of like Yu-Gi-Oh decks these days actually have pretty good solutions to this, like Super Poly and Droplet and stuff like that do have meaningful impact against a lot of decks in the format. I just think that these solutions are a little bit too few and far between, and a lot of decks can't make use of it, and also a lot of decks are also not weak to those cards anymore if they are allowed to, like, for example, Mitsurugi Azumina here. Like, if your opponent ends on the Mitsurugi trap card, that basically invalidates like Forbidden Droplet, and if they got like 3 back row as well, then, well, your Super Poly only does so much. And also, if like the thing is, like, those cards are good solutions though, because they don't auto win the game either. Like, I don't want the player going second to auto win on the spot as well, right? It's not something I would like to see. Just activate one Dark Ruler and win the game off of it is also not super fun. I don't know. I'm not sure. I understand it is a weird or a very big topic that is not easy to solve. But I did want to, like, you know, get my standpoint on like the negation stuff that's going on out of there. Because I think another big problem with negation hand traps is that, like, essentially these cards, one of the main arguments for why those cards could be fair or could be considered fair is that they don't really do much other than just simplify the game state, right? Just like trade 1 for 1. Ash your spell, or Valor your card effect, or Imperm your card effect, or Bell your card, is all just a 1-for-1 trade, which in the grand scheme of things isn't anything crazy, right? I acknowledge that, right? Trading 1 for 1 is not necessarily a problem, but I do think in the context of modern Yu-Gi-Oh, it can be, because simplifying the game state 1 for 1, and this is something that I think this is actually objective, but I think simplifying the game state 1 for 1 is significantly better for the player going first in Yu-Gi-Oh than the player going second. Because the nature of modern Yu-Gi-Oh evolves a lot around 1-card combos resolving and creating a lot of card advantage. So 1-card resolving can, like, basically create, and this is not even an exaggeration, like 10 cards for the player going first, right? So when the player going first is the player resolving those combos first, essentially you're not playing 5 cards versus 5 cards. If you resolve one of your cards, you are playing like 14 versus 5, right? And when you play let's just say 10 versus 5 to simplify the stuff here. But when you technically have access to like 10 cards because you're the first one resolving 1-card combos, spending one of your cards to get rid of one of your opponent's cards is an insanely good trade for the player going first, because you have 10 cards total, your opponent has 5 cards, you're spending 10% of your cards for 20% of their cards every time you make a 1-for-1 trade, right? So because the player going first is the first one to generate card advantage, 1-for-1 trades are significantly better for the player going first. And especially if you ever are in a spot where you can combine, because you're the first one to make an end board, right? You are the first one to create interaction with your opponent. If you can combine your hand traps with your interaction to stop your opponent from even reaching their combos or reaching their card advantage, then your opponent can never catch up with your card advantage that you've created, right? You've already made a board. You still have non-engine in hand. So if you can just trade 1 for 1, you've got more cards to trade with. You got 10 to 15 cards going first. Your opponent has 5 or 6. If you can trade 1 for 1, you win, right? So this is why I think this is not healthy in modern Yu-Gi-Oh! Even though by design, like a 1 for 1 trade might not sound problematic, I think it is in the context of how the game is being played in a modern sense. So I would love for them to give us alternatives, basically. To give us alternatives for the player going second. And most importantly, I don't want those cards to be like the Mole Charmies, because I think the Mole Charmies also have some inherent problems. Like, for example, I'm not a fan when the card is only usable going second and basically completely useless going first. I think that also creates a lot of unnecessary variance. I think it should just be cards that are better for the player going second than for the player going first. Droplet is my favorite example for this, because Droplet is a card that when you go first, it's still usable. It's just not as good. But when you go second, it gets a lot better. So I think basically, if I had to rank non-engine cards by how healthy they are for the game, I think the healthiest cards are better going second than going first, but still usable going first. They're not completely dead cards. The second healthiest are cards that pretty much only benefit the player going second, but aren't really good going first at all. So as a result, they are usually bricks, which is not ideal, or they are just side deck cards, which is also not ideal, because if it's just a side deck card, then it doesn't have impact on as many games as you would like it to have. And then the third category, the worst category in terms of card design, in my opinion, are the cards that are better going first than going second. And that is essentially where I think that's where most of the hand traps fall, because of what I just explained with the 1 for 1 trading. Like the 1 for 1 trading falls into that category of cards that are better going first than going second. That's also where a lot of the side deck cards fall, like the Solemns, right? Solemn Strike or Solemn Judgment or whatever, same thing. Going first, you make a board, you set a Solemn, 1 for 1 trading is very good for you. That's why those cards are good, and that's why those cards are also, I think, they haven't aged very well, right? You don't necessarily have to agree with me on wanting to get rid of some of these non-engine cards, but at least I hope I was able to make my point clear. I'm not saying that like a card like Effect Veiler is unfair or anything like that, but I do think like 1 for 1 trading significantly benefits the player going first, and I just don't love that. Veiler is a joke compared with Droll and Lockbird. That's the thing, right? Droll and Lockbird is, I would say, in general, a more frustrating card than Effect Veiler, 100%. I do think Droll and Lockbird falls into a completely different category of cards, though, which is why, like, it is also a card that I don't want in the game. Absolutely, I agree with you. But I do think that Droll and Lockbird just falls into the category of floodgates instead of the category of like 1 for 1 trades, right? And I think both can be true, right? Like both can be concerning. The player going first, opening a lot of 1 for 1 trades is very good for them. At the same time, a floodgate can still be a problem. Like that is, you know, both things can be true in this particular instance, I think. You know, so just because I say like they should get rid of Ash Blossom doesn't mean I think Droll and Lockbird is okay. That is something that's like very commonly being misconstrued everywhere. Like whenever I say like I want Ash Blossom gone, people say like, oh, but Droll and Lockbird is fine, huh? Like it's not something I've said. Not something that I think either. Like I think Droll and Lockbird should also go away. Josh hates waffles, confirmed. I do hate waffles. No, I don't. I feel like gameplay with Droll gets worse the more engine versus engine we play. Yes, absolutely. In an ideal world, Yu-Gi-Oh cards resolve and are activatable. I think that's the simplest way for me to put it is, in an ideal world, both players are allowed to play the game. So, and playing the game means that you can activate your cards and you can resolve some of your cards at least. And so we have a lot of cards in the game right now that actively like prevent you from doing that. So if a card, I think if a card straight up negates another card, or if a card prevents you from activating your cards, I think those cards are a problem. So that's where all the floodgates go, and that's where all of the negations go. And I think those, in my opinion, those are the two biggest problems of modern Yu-Gi-Oh! Is because players are simply not often enough allowed to play the game. Because I think Yu-Gi-Oh! Is at its best when both players are allowed to play the game. Floodgates, Omni Negations, and endboards that are too powerful are all three together like the trinity of big problems that Yu-Gi-Oh! Can have sometimes. And it's better in some formats, it's worse in others. But those are the three things, right? And I think most people agree on that. Just people disagree on the solution for it, because people see like people often they see the problems isolated from each other and they use them to justify each other, right? Like two powerful endboards, negation and floodgates, those three, and people look at one of those issues and they use that one to justify the other. They're like, well, this combo deck does too much, so we need to play the hand trap minigame, otherwise, you know, that deck's too strong. And then people are like, oh, this combo deck is too strong, so the floodgates are actually fine, because how else am I supposed to win against insert whatever combo deck, right? And so on and so forth. Or like, hey, I'm getting hand trapped to death every time I try to play my rogue deck, so of course I'm going to activate floodgates to win the game, like naturally, right? Or, well, everyone is playing 20 hand traps now, so of course my combo deck needs to be playing 15 extenders and end on an auto win board, because otherwise I'm gonna get stopped by an Ash Blossom, right? So this is like the thing where like you can't fix one issue without the other. Like you can't remove the hand trap gameplay from the game without also addressing the combo decks, you know? And even some of the floodgates are mainly here because they beat some of the combo decks, like Shifter and Droll. Like we would have never even needed Shifter or Droll in the format if the combo decks weren't getting out of hand, right? So if you want to solve those problems, you have to kind of like address all of them, you know, at the same time. You make it sound easy. It's not easy. I understand that. But that's the thing that frustrated me with this is like, I know it's not easy and I know it's a long process and I know we need to go step by step, but step by step implies that you need, even if you're only taking baby steps, you need to make baby steps. And this is not a step. There's nothing on here. Is essentially my point, right? That's where my disappointment comes from. I'm obviously not expecting them to do all of this at once, but if it's a process, then we at some point need to make progress. Otherwise, you know, nothing is gonna happen. And the thing is, like, the progress also needs to, they need some sort of pace in this, because if you don't make progress, then like power creep is a problem. Because if you make no progress, think about it this way: if the ultimate goal is to make endboards fairer, right? In order to make progress on this, you have to hit decks faster, because otherwise, if you're trying to sell new stuff, you have to make it even more powerful. The only way to release new stuff into the game that is balanced is if the older stuff has already been addressed. Because otherwise, if you don't address K9 combo decks, for example, properly, if you want to give a new combo deck to players, you have to make it better than that. If you want to give people a new mid-range deck, you have to make that mid-range deck even more unfair than the existing one if you haven't addressed the existing one already, right? So the pace of fixing needs to be faster than the pace of adding new power-crept stuff into the game. Otherwise, we're never you know what I mean? You get what I say, right? Like I don't know how else to put it. But like you can't be too slow with this, otherwise it's never gonna catch up. Konami is not a non-profit. Yeah, what does that have to do with anything? Like I would actually argue, from my perspective, I think Konami could be making a lot more money if they got rid of cards from like 15 years ago, bro. What kind of money are they making because of Dimensional Fissure, bro? Reprint packs? Ah, bro, Dimensional Fissure isn't selling any packs these days. If anything, Dimensional Fissure is driving people away from the game. Frame Break Dimensional Fissure gonna go hard? Unironically, that would look sick. Overframed Di-Fi would look sick. I mean, it's a good looking card. I'll give you that much. Clips of you getting floodgated or FTK'd are funny and bring attention to the game you're suffering to their money. Or is it their money? I mean, like, here's the thing, right? I'm once again, I've made my peace with the fact that like this stuff is going to exist in this game and is not going to be completely gone. But I do like, here's the thing. I was hanging out in Jesse's stream yesterday after we raided there. Some of you probably saw it, and I was a little confused by the fact that he actually liked the ban list. And so I talked to him a little bit, and what I gathered was that we agreed on most of the things, on a lot of the issues I had, a lot of the cards that I was missing on this ban list. He actually agreed on it. He didn't agree on Ash or like Impulse or something like that, but that's fine. But he agreed on some of the underlying issues that we just talked about. But he's just like decided that he's given up on wanting all of that to happen and just instead accepted the way it is and just was happy about Fairy Tail Snow and Rose Whip being gone. Which, like, I understand your perspective, but I just don't agree with it, right? Like, I genuinely, I believe if at the point where you just like get complacent and you don't you stop like saying anything, then I'm not ready to give up on it yet. You're a lone crusader on Ash and Impulse? I don't think I'm a lone crusader, Nesh. I don't know if you were here, but I think the points that I made earlier were actually pretty good and a lot of people agreed with it. I think if you properly think about it, I think you'll agree. If you haven't seen it, then you can rewind the VOD. I think you'll agree with it. I'm honestly thinking one of the biggest issues of Cool Tune is Ash. I mean, Cool Tune really exaggerates this issue. And I think a lot of the issues that people have with Cool Tune, especially Nesh as well, who's been very vocal about hating Cool Tune. One of the main issues with Cool Tune is it shows people how good this 1-for-1 trading is for the player going first when they have even better knowledge. The win rate of that deck is so dependent on just 1-for-1 trading with your opponent's cards. There are more people with Josh than with our Chancellor. Bro, if you're talking Germany, then that bar is kind of low, I think. That's a pretty low bar. That doesn't mean that much.